Welcome to Global Vid, a podcast about original productions and international TV and film distribution. I'm your host, Eric Y. Lapointe, and we're about to learn how people in our industry are expanding their footprint and finding the right partners around the world. This show was created by Now Global and is also available as an audio format on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. And welcome everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Global Vid. That's right, the Vid podcast has changed its name, its logo, and its overall look and feel. A few weeks back, we got the chance to sit down with a true expert in broadcasting, production, and international distribution. His name is Brad Danks, and he is the CEO of OUTtv, which is the only private Canadian broadcaster based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. Brad not only runs this specialty TV channel, he is also the world's largest producer and aggregator of LGBTQ plus film and television content. He has also built his own OTT platform called OUTtv Go, and in his international expansion, he has confirmed deals with the likes of Amazon, Apple, Roku, Tubi, Fuse, all in the United States, and Showmax in South Africa, 7plus in Australia, and TVNZ in New Zealand. But before all that, Brad got his start as a lawyer, slowly but surely making his way towards the entertainment industry. Let's meet Brad Danks right now. Welcome, Brad. How are you?
I'm excellent. How are you, Eric?
I'm very good, thank you. All right, I think it's very appropriate that you are one of my first Vancouver guests on this podcast, because you and I have known each other back since my Cirque du Soleil days, and you were literally one of the three or four people I actually knew, and I remember calling you about a year before even planning on moving out to Vancouver, and you were very, very helpful to me at that time. You know, and this is part of what this podcast is all about, is talking about original programming, but obviously Vancouver remains a city that focuses a great deal on production service work. Right. And I didn't always get the most positive feedback about moving out to Vancouver, but you were more motivating and said, you know what, if you keep networking, you're going to find the right people to work with. And it took some time, but that's exactly what happened. So anyways, with that in mind, I just wanted to quickly share that. But thank you for that publicly.
I vaguely remembered that, but your comment is exactly right. Vancouver is such a service-oriented town, and of course, my thinking is, God, we need more business people here. So it's good that you've made your way and that you're finding your way. So it's great.
Tell me a little bit more about OUTtv and its mission before we get started with this interview.
I mean, OUTtv was the world's first LGBT channel. We didn't even have Q on it at the time. It was launched in 2001 as Pride Vision in Canada. It was a bold experiment, really, at the time. There was a series of other digital services all launching at the same time, and it launched. And there was another group that started it. I wasn't involved back then. And they launched with much fanfare and struggled for 3 years. The group that was behind it got out of it. Another group got into it. They changed the name to OUTtv. They went for about another 2 more years. And then in 2006, I was part of a group that took OUTtv over. And the mission was to provide programming for the LGBTQ community, but also tell their stories, but to be a bridge service to try and help educate Canadians and certainly anyone around the world on the community, sort of to create that point of view from the LGBTQ community and tell their stories.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's start with you and your own personal story. And this is the part of the show that I'm starting to integrate that I'm sure listeners are going to enjoy quite a bit, to learn how people got into the industry and help them guide as they grow within our industry. So how did you get started in entertainment?
It's interesting. I have an uncle that's in the music business in Toronto. And when I was in law school, he kept saying to me, you got to be an entertainment lawyer. You got to be an entertainment lawyer. And I said, there's no courses on entertainment law. It's not really a big thing. I know there's some entertainment lawyers out there, but I think I need to learn to do some regular stuff. And now when I graduated from law school, I went and worked at a downtown firm in Vancouver, and I did primarily litigation work. I really thought I wanted to be a courtroom lawyer, and I liked the courtroom side and was good at it, but I also didn't like the fact that everything I was doing was in the past. I was always arguing about something that happened, 2, 3 years ago, and whether it was a motor vehicle accident or a breach of contract, whatever it was. And so I sort of thought, gee, I didn't realize in law school that that's what litigation would really be. I thought, I watched these TV shows where the client came in on Monday and you were in court on Wednesday, and of course it takes years. So I ended up being referred, and this is where my uncle was connected. A friend of my uncle's in Vancouver who had some music problems with some stuff he was doing. He needed a lawyer to help him. And one of the things that really happened was I looked at this contract that he had that was subject to litigation. And I said, God, this is really bad. Like if you had a better contract, you wouldn't be in litigation, and litigation is expensive. And he said, well, I can't afford a lawyer when I get the deal. And I said, yeah, but it's a big project. Surely at some point you can pay. He said, well, I can pay later, but not initially. And I said, well, you can pay me later. I'm happy to do that for you. Because with litigation, you took a lot of cases on contingency fee and so on, and you were used to getting paid a little later. But whereas solicitor work, generally they want the money up front. And I discovered that sort of nascent group of people in Vancouver that were starting in the industry, they needed help. And so I decided I would start moving in that direction. And, I did some music work and worked for some of the bigger artists in Canada at the time. But I also realized that was not where the real work was. It was in the TV and film side. So I began pushing my career in that direction. And I ended up striking out on my own and starting my own law firm after I've been in law for about 4 years and developed a really good practice. And I was sort of lucky because at the time Vancouver was just starting and there weren't that many lawyers. There had been some lawyers that had come from down east as part of firms like Heen and Blakey and so on. But there were, every deal requires a lawyer on each side. So there became this opportunity to sort of learn the business and get into it. And I did that. I just marketed myself, was everywhere, was out talking to people, and ended up over time getting a fairly good client base, and went from everything from smaller Canadian producers and artists to working for some of the banks on financings, to working for U.S. studios, U.S. broadcasters, international financings over the course of 2, 3, 4 years. It was sort of dramatic in how it happened because in some ways I was in the right place at the right time. But others were trying to do it too. I just think I was a bit of a marketing maniac during the time and got myself out and then was trying really hard to do the work. And ultimately, that's kind of how my practice developed.
And how did that ended up transitioning? You talked about a little bit about it in your intro, but tell me a little bit more about how that transitioned into your job now at OUTtv.
Yeah, one of the things that happens when you practice law in the entertainment field is you get into the nuts and bolts of all the deals so often, and your cabinet is filled with so much going on at any one time. You really learn so much more about the business than your clients would ever have an opportunity to. And after a while, I started saying, I really would like to try the business side. And so I started moving in that direction and doing a bunch of different things. There were some people I worked with in LA. There were some other people I was doing a bunch of things with. But one of my clients, longtime clients, a guy named James Shavik, came to me one day and he said, look, there's a TV channel in Canada that's gone bankrupt. And that was OUTtv, and that was in April of 2006. He said, it's gone bankrupt. And a friend of mine who I knew had a company in LA who had a similar channel in the US. We're looking at it and we're interested in potentially buying it. Could you go to Toronto and meet with the people that are there and find out about this channel and see if it's something that might make sense? And so it was really on sort of a consulting contract at the time that I went in, or I guess the best way to put it. Went to Toronto, met with some people, talked. There were people that we knew in Toronto. I'm familiar with Jay Switzer, who passed a few years ago, but Jay had been the CEO at Chum. He knew a lot about it because they had coveted the channel for a while. Met with him and talked to him. There were other people. And I came away thinking that it was a really good opportunity. The channel was not particularly well run, and that helps because businesses that aren't particularly well run are easier to fix, right? And, pity the coach whose team won the Stanley Cup last year. They got the tougher job, not the one whose team, finished last, right? And I saw it as an opportunity, but I also thought there were elements of it that I liked for the future because I had been spending a fair bit of time thinking about where I thought the business would go. And I thought that niche services that had sort of global appeal would have an opportunity over time to be significant as the digital world, developed. And so I thought OUTtv could be one of those types of services that could be more valuable in the future as well on a global basis. And that was sort of incorporated into the sort of early DNA. Plus, I liked the mission. I liked, being part of something that mattered. A huge supporter of the community in many ways. I thought it was all very interesting. So I did the work, sort of came back and said to James and the other fellow, I think this is a real good opportunity. You should really pursue it. And sort of left it with them. And then in a very short period of time, I think probably a week to 10 days, James called me back in and said, look, we're going to go ahead with this, but we've decided we'd like you to run it for us and be the COO. And, my first thought was, wow, but I was committed to it. I believed in the things that I had written down. I mean, that was the first thing he asked me. He said, do you believe in all this? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, that's good because, this is what we'd like to do. And so we sort of set about doing that. And, I really obviously give James a ton of credit because I had not run a business like that before, and I had not run a broadcaster. But I think at the end of the day, there were some advantages to that because we tended to look at the business a little differently than it was in the past. And we tended to think of things a little differently because I had come from a production background, my first thinking is, how do I make more content? Whereas, Canadian broadcasting, and even still today, sadly, is very much about, who are you buying it from? And so we wanted to sort of invert that and use a production model to try and develop our own product with the idea of really exporting it. And we had that sort of built into the DNA right away. So, that was really it. And that was in 2006. I was COO at the time. I think the official date was June 30.
What is a CEOO? That sounds like trouble.
Chief Operating Officer is essentially the person who manages all operations. So reports to the CEO and is the person who, and James was became the CEO, and I'm the COO, and I ran sort of the day-to-day affairs. So, programming and marketing and everything sort of reported to me, and I was engaged in developing the strategy for the company and really reporting to James as CEO.
So was the headquarters still based out of Toronto at the time? And were you basically going flying back and forth?
Yeah.
Or did you already start to transition the head office to Vancouver?
We really didn't look at moving the head office to Vancouver for a while. It wasn't really important. We tried to sort of create a duality. The first thing I had to do was assess which staff was going to stay and who was going to go. But more importantly, it was kind of like, what's the business need? Like, how does it need? And, over time, we gradually would put more people in Vancouver because it was easier for me to manage from Vancouver. But there are benefits to being in Toronto, and there are elements of the business that are best in Toronto. Advertising sales is the easiest one.
Yeah.
But it became sort of a constant thing. There was never this sort of, we're going to fire everyone and move it all to Vancouver. We never really had that discussion. Whatever happened kind of happened organically.
And tell me a little bit more about the transition towards finally bringing in some investors on board and basically, you can correct me on the exact terminology, but a kind of takeover back in 2016, where you led a group to buy OUTtv.
We did really well in rebuilding OUTtv from 2006 to about 2010, 2011. But starting in that period, two things were happening. First of all, the environment in Canada was changing and getting more harsh. In 2010, it was vertical integration when the bigger media companies were buying the channels. And that was making it very difficult for independent channels to survive within the system. We worked very hard during those years to try and solidify a position for OUTtv within the broadcasting system in Canada. But there was a real push to give more control to the larger media companies as if they were going to be the ones who would, save the Canadian system. I think we know now that hasn't worked really at all, but that's a whole other discussion for another time. But during that time, James and the other shareholders were trying to figure out what to do. And there were other shareholders, including some groups, and specifically one group, an LGBT group in Toronto, Pink Triangle Press, who were there when we arrived, who we always had a great relationship and a lot of fondness for. And there was a decision at the time to buy them out, and James, wanted to be the sole owner at the time. And that was around 2012 that all that happened, 2012, 2013. And then the business the other changes going on, Netflix came to Canada and we started seeing the movement towards OTT and so on. And I sort of reached the point where my contract was up, and I went to James and I said, look, I think OUTtv should become a global brand and should go to the next level. You don't have to do that. You could keep rolling along in Canada and see where things go, but the long term doesn't look positive. The system is shaped against us in terms of our scale and where we are. We're not getting the sort of regulatory help that we think we deserve. And so I think it's time to sort of figure out where to go. And to his credit, he agreed. And because I said, if this happens, it's going to change your situation, because no investor is going to want to put money into this without owning, a significant share of the company, if not, majority ownership. And it'll change your overall position. But I think that the long term is better this way. And I said that if I do this, I'd like to be, the CEO, because I really felt that I'd been running the company for a number of years anyways. And it was really like, people were always surprised that I wasn't the CEO. I was meeting them. They're like, aren't you the CEO? You seem to be. And that's no, discredit to James. Obviously, that was sort of the way we had agreed to function. And he, to his credit, as I said, he said, absolutely. He said, I think, this is what the community deserves. This is what the business deserves. This makes a lot of sense. So we met with an equity firm in Vancouver that we knew. I had some interest from Silicon Valley and from other firms in the US. But we started in Vancouver, and Stern Partners moved very quickly. They said, yes, we really want to do this and get behind it. So that was 2016. And the basic pitch was that we would start an OTT service in Canada, and then we'd use that as a launching point to begin to do more original programming, and also to spread that particular platform to other platforms around the world. And so that's what we did. And we launched OUTtv Go in the fall of 2016. And then we began to, gradually begin to globalize the brand and to approach the business, the new sort of digital world, in a meaningful way.
Okay. So this is the part that really excites me a great deal, because now clearly you're taking OUTtv internationally. This is definitely part of the podcast. And you're also focusing on original programming that is meant for the community. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that expansion and your first steps into taking OUTtv globally. And let's start with the beta test in Canada with OUTtv Go as your first kind of digital test. And because obviously digital and international may sound different, but in your case, they really feel like they're completely linked together, especially with the audience. And like in the past when we've spoken, I remember you saying something to the effect, and you can say it much better than me, but saying something to the effect of, there's not necessarily the buyers out there for that type of content, but the audience is definitely there.
Yeah. My exact phrase, which I repeated.
Say it, please. Because I think I ruined it.
I always say, no, you didn't. I always say there's an audience, but there's no market. Meaning
Okay.
There was no way to connect to the audience. And there are, there's different platforms. There's TVOD on iTunes and Google Play and places like that. So that became, one of the early areas. We were one of the earliest Canadian channels to use iTunes effectively.
Yeah.
There were other avenues, but it was really about syncing up the programming to your specific audience and building from there. And we always, we knew from as early as the late 1990s. If you remember back then, there was the big AOL Time Warner acquisition, and that was all sort of based on this idea that this is where the future would go. But I think we underestimated how much technology needed to happen before all of it would be pulled together. Everything from how do videos become compressed to billing payment options to what's the structure of an OTT service, how much content do you need, the wireless lines. I mean, how do we need, is 3G enough? Do we need 4G, fiber, so on? So all of those components were there. And a lot of credit goes to Netflix, who pushed into this area and kept going. And I think Canada, they came in 2009, and we started seeing them, beginning to globalize. And it was their ability to create that customer model that allowed other people to. There wouldn't be an OUTtv Go if there hadn't been a Netflix.
Okay.
Now, it was an obvious move for the industry, but somebody had to do it, and somebody had to move into that space, and somebody had to make it work. And they did. And so it allowed you to say, okay, this will work. But the things you don't know is how much content do you need, and what's the price point? And, there's, as we say, there's all the things you don't know. And we felt that in 2016, it was the right time because we knew as an organization we'd have to learn a lot about OTT. And, we set about doing that. It was funny because so many people said to me, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I'm like, why can't we do that? Like, of course we can. We're interested in being a content company with brand. We're happy to rent the technology. So we've always been renting technology from providers from the very beginning, and we've been lucky. We've got, well, I should say lucky. We spent a lot of time figuring out what we needed. Everyone wants to build their own. Every engineer says they can build you one. But I never believed in that. It's not that I don't think that every engineer can build one. It's a whole other conversation. I don't even want to get into the argument. But what you find is you get in those the things you don't know. And unless your provider had already dealt with content from the studios and things like that, they didn't really know what was involved. So we picked some good providers. We've been with Bright Cove now for a few years. They've done a very good job for us. And it's allowed us to do deals with the studios and other people for content. And that's been important. It's made a big difference. So that was really part of it. And all of the inner workings within the organization, and especially in the marketing side and picking shows and how you think about shows, it changes with OTT. It changes a lot from linear. And I'll give you probably the primary example. We began right at the beginning of dividing programs into what we called conversion and retention shows. A conversion show is something that somebody would subscribe for, and a retention show is something that person would stay for. And they're different. The conversion shows are higher level, higher production. They are shows that they'll have that marketing element that someone's going to come in for. And the other shows are ones that people would align with. And so figuring that part of the business out and how that fits with your production model has been a big part of our learnings over the last few years, and also a big focus on how we've been successful in growing our business.
So let's talk about taking the OUTtv Go subscription, video on demand, SVOD platform beyond the Canadian borders, and also finding partners and taking that original programming you have and it, once again, going globally. What were the first steps at that stage to really go beyond the Canadian borders?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we decided we would do, instead of launching OUTtv Go directly, consumer-wide, one of the complications with that is that it's hard to create a system where all of the content on it you own globally. So you have to segment it in different areas. So we decided instead how we'd approach it is we looked to territories that we thought would be friendly. And I called them the three that we identified, the Goldilocks territories. Goldilocks in the cereal, not too hot, not too cold. So, too hot in terms of countries would be the US and the UK because the content costs would be so high. Too cold would be, Russia and places where LGBTQ rights were looked upon unfavorably. Could we find some territories that were just right? And there were three that we targeted right away: New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa. Commonwealth countries, predominantly English speaking, and relatively easy in comparison anyways compared to the US and the UK in terms of acquiring rights to significant programming. So we focused on those three territories because we felt that we could figure out what it would be like, and we could have enough content for those places, we could travel to them, and we could work out relationships. So our first deal was with TV New Zealand.
Okay.
I flew to New Zealand, I met with them, and they were launching an AVOD platform similar to what GEM has, CBC in Canada. And we asked for sort of a branded portion within that platform that we would provide them with content. And it's been a great relationship. The deal took about 20 minutes to do, and they are the nicest people. And the relationship has been fantastic from the very beginning. And it's a small country, clearly, but it's been a country we learned a lot from. And as we particularly make our investments in original programming, we'll continue to focus on upping the game in New Zealand. But it was a great start, and we ended up doing a deal with Channel 7 in Australia, which hasn't been as big a deal in terms of the content we've delivered. We have other pending deals in Australia that this has led to that we'll do more in certainly in 2021. And we're on Showmax in South Africa, which is the premium platform there. But in each of those territories, we'll now find more ways to expand our distribution because we now know the territory better and we've got some brand recognition.
So are these partnerships basically an extension of the OUTtv Go application where people can go on Showmax and Channel 7 and TVNZ and actually get the content on demand, or is there a different model for these countries?
Oh, there's a different model depending on the platform. Like for example, TV New Zealand is an AVOD platform.
Yeah.
So there's a branded portion on TV New Zealand that has OUTtv content that we deliver on a monthly basis. And we have a relationship with TVNZ. We've worked out the revenue side. Channel 7 is similar, and other ones we're working on. But we want an SVOD deal in Australia, which we have now, and we're just working on that because we can't put all our content up under AVOD platforms. Some of it is, just it's too valuable to be put in an AVOD platform alone, and also sometimes it's just not viewable in the AVOD type platforms as well. So the way I look at it is that sometimes we like with OUTtv Go, we have direct to consumer in Canada, but we've also taken that same content and put it on Amazon as an Amazon channel in Canada and put it on Apple TV under the Apple Plus brand as a channel. So we tend to be very flexible. We would say, you have the direct to consumer model, but we also will do platform distribution through the platform. And sometimes that is the full array of our library, and sometimes it's a portion of the library. Sometimes with some people, a good example would be a company like Tubi. We just put our programming up, and our programming is, they don't do branded channels or services like that, although they do that. We haven't done that with them yet. I think their model is better the way we're doing it right now on the AVOD side. But with each of the platforms, it becomes a different arrangement based on what they do and their business model. For us, again, it's content brand. So we like to say we're not flexible, we're contortionists.
And the OUTtv Go platform, despite the fact that you are finding these partners internationally and that the focus is Canada, is it available to somebody in any given country around the world where they can subscribe and get a portion of the content?
No, it's not. We haven't opened up globally, although it's one of the things that we're in the process of doing is expanding our global reach. Again, the reason for that is that because of rights and rights issues, we don't have all the territories, and it's hard to segregate and create different channels for each country.
Yeah.
And so that's an area that's tricky and that we're working on. But we are expanding our distribution. We're doing a lot of expansion this year into other major territories, I guess formerly hot territories, to use my term. Plus, we're pushing into Europe and a number of other places as well. So gradually we're accelerating the places we are. And again, each territory we look at differently. We decide whether or not it's SVOD or AVOD, or is there a platform partner. And most of those platform deals are generally non-exclusive, meaning that we have the flexibility to try 2 or 3 different ways if we do within the territory.
So for just a moment, let's talk about the United States, because you mentioned Tubi. What are the other platforms that you have partnered with in order to spread your original programming?
We have a deal with Fuse Media. Fuse Media is a channel, very Gen Z, as we would say here in Canada, focused on a much younger audience that are more LGBTQ friendly. And we've got a show that we're doing with them. We're really excited about. We're partnering with them in Bison, called Closed Minded, that we really, really like. But I've known the people at Fuse for a while, and we talked about coming in on their AVOD platforms. And the three first platforms were Pluto TV, Zumo, and Samsung in the US. So we have content on all three of those platforms on the Fuse channel. And we've added Peacock now to the list, where we've got content on Peacock as a result. And then we'll be adding two more probably before either the end of the year or early 2021 through Fuse. I can't name them yet. But more importantly, another element there is because we also want, those are all AVOD deals, all advertising supported deals. We are preparing for, SVOD in the US. And that's really the ultimate goal. Our view is that SVOD is the highest end of the business. It's where we want to be the most, but we do like the AVOD space because it's a great way to continue to, work your library and generate additional revenue from what you already own.
And just to backtrack for a quick moment with the show that you co-produced with Vice and Fuse called Closed Minded, can you tell us a little bit about that show and where that might air in Canada? It'll
be all OUTtv. It won't be anywhere else. For a show like that, we'll pick it up. Fuse will own the U.S. rights, and there's a complicated deal between us and Vice and Fuse regarding international rights. It will end up, I'm pretty confident, on some of the OUTtv platforms around the world, but it'll be something that we'll have to talk to our partners about. It was a deal where Vice, the Vice group in Canada, had approached us about coming up with some ideas, and they pitched us some ideas, and we liked this particular idea a lot. But we decided, and this goes back a ways, the show's been in, from the early stages of development for more than a year. We went to Fuse with it and said, you might really like this for the US. Be good to do something together. And they agreed. And so that's how we ended up in the three-way.
And just real quick, what's the story about?
I'm going to call it a fashion show, but that's not doing it justice. The talent is just really interesting, and the way they look at fashion and clothes for the LGBTQI, particularly the T portion of the group. It's got a very community focus in a different way with a fashion element to it. It's very different than anything else that we've seen. That's why we really jumped at it.
So in your 15, well, I'm doing the math, in your 14 years of running OUTtv, how have you seen the international marketplace evolving in terms of how they even take your pitches? Because as I've mentioned to you in a prior conversation, like I have a LGBTQ series that I've been selling abroad, and just very quickly you get into certain meetings and you see people physically move back. Because obviously in many countries around the world, unfortunately, homosexuality is still criminalized and another just frowned upon, unfortunately, still to this day. How have you seen that evolving, especially as you're going into the marketplace and you're making these partnerships with Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, three countries that are known already to be very open-minded. But as you venture in other markets like Latin America or elsewhere, how do you see society changing, basically?
Yeah, I was of the view that the changes were going to come relatively quickly. When I say 2006 on, I really felt there was a strong momentum in favor of LGBTQ rights. And to some extent, I still think that's true, but there has been a lot of pushback in various places. And it really has been, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, in some cases, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. And so there is a lot of reactionary pushback in various places around the world. So it's not sort of a uniform progress. And countries that were becoming, more gay friendly, like Brazil, for example, has a new president that's not that way at all. And you get countries like the Philippines as well that was heading in the right direction and now is stalled. So there isn't sort of this uniform improvement. I would say that, the biggest challenge was that the more traditional big companies around the world, because sort of every country has that sort of concentration level of 2 or 3 big companies, we're very conservative. And if you get into a country that's highly Catholic or certainly highly Muslim, they usually can be more problematic. You see that with, Poland and places like that in Europe and Hungary, or you see it with, a lot of places around the world in Indonesia or places like that. We saw it in Latin America, where a lot of Latin American big cable companies were very, very shy. I think the biggest difference is sort of twofold. One, there's been a lot more. There's been a lot of iconic LGBTQ series that have kind of broken down doors, whether it's Queer as Folk and Transparent and others that have made a difference. The other thing that's happened within media is there's been more characters show up in more mainstream shows. There's been, the Will and Graces, and there's been shows like that, and more characters. The gay doctor in the show, the gay lawyer in the show, the gay brother, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that's
twine just like normal life.
Yeah, and I think that's been something. And interestingly enough, in our early years, if a show had a very dominant character from the community, second, third, fourth person even, we would take a look at the show because it had a gay element. We don't do that anymore. And I think the biggest change is that our world has become more gay, in that the shows that we look at are very much more community focused and need to be authentic. And I think that's part of the digital situation right now. I think is the community looks for more authenticity, looks for members of the community both in front of and behind the camera, and the stories to be more true to life. And I think that's the overall thing. And the reality is that much of the world hasn't caught up to that. So what I'll oftentimes find is when we're talking to people even if people are excited in other territories, and a couple that I talked about, they're still at a different stage. Like they want, for a good example is coming out stories. People want to do coming out stories. People want to do gay marriage. Well, we did coming out and gay marriage stories, more than a decade ago. Our audience doesn't really want to see coming out stories now. They don't really want to see gay marriage stories anymore. But people do want to see that in some other territories because it's kind of new and novel, right? So there are different levels within the community around the communities around the world. So we sort of have to correlate to that a little bit when we're pitching people. But your comment was exactly right. We very often found resistance in strange places. And the comment that I was least favorite of, that I got the most, was, I don't have a problem with it, but other people might. So in other words, I don't want to take a risk because it's my job, but, because somebody might call and complain. And, that was the thing in Canada when one of the head cable executives, Jim Shaw Jr., made a big deal and saying, I don't want to be in the call center when that channel launches. People are going to complain. People are going to call. And, we launched in Canada and nothing happened. It was the things that people think are going to happen. We've had this too, where we've launched in territories and you've had all these people sitting around nervously thinking that the sky would fall down. This happened in South Africa. We did a linear feed to start with Mnet, who owns Showmax. We always said we should be an SVOD channel and on your service there, but they wanted to do a linear channel. And the problem with the linear was it meant we had to sort of take some of the programming down a notch that we wanted to have on there, like no nudity. And so we really cleaned it up and made it very family friendly. And they literally sat nervously as the channel launched, waiting for, something bad to happen. And we were just going, it's not going to be a big deal. And it wasn't. It really wasn't. It worked out pretty well. And after a while, they were pretty comfortable with it. So we did end up going in the SVOD way. But it is interesting to watch because, I wasn't really there in 2001 when Pride Vision launched. And apparently it was like that in Canada. And you get it in the States too now, too. This is one of the really interesting parts about where we are as a business is that, we are in Canada ahead of the U.S. in this respect. Not to say that there aren't, lots of people in the U.S. who feel differently, but there is a significant segment of the U.S. population that has real issues with LGBTQ rights, as you know. So we don't fight those battles the same way in Canada as they are in the U.S. So
I think Canadians might be a little bit more polite and quiet about it if they have views that disagree with you. Unfortunately, we're known to be polite, but maybe also passive aggressive.
You know what? You see this, right? When a certain right will come up, and I see stuff where certain people running for certain political parties, won't do this, won't attend Pride, and this and that. So we do have this stuff in Canada, but we get hate mail from this country as well that is just, ridiculous all the time. So there are people, and I think we have less of them than a lot of other places, but they still exist here.
So do you feel you're running an enterprise, but I do feel like you've got a social mission as well in order to give that voice to Canadian LGBTQ community?
We do. I think about this quite a bit because how lucky we are here to be able to have that mission. It's frustrating in a way because you're constantly having to knock down, barriers, and you're constantly getting into fights you shouldn't have to get into. But on the other hand, it is the privilege to be part of something where you're spreading, the mission around the world. And I talk to so many people in other countries and other stuff. And so, it's nice to, from time to time, be an inspiration. It's nice when some of your programming really gets picked up and noticed in places. And we've had stuff picked up all over the world. I would say one of the sadder parts of being a Canadian is that, a lot of our stuff is done better outside of Canada than inside of Canada, or it's got better recognition. And I think Canadians always have a problem with, congratulating themselves on anything. I've never quite understood that part of our psyche. Mm-hmm. But we see that at OUTtv. I mean, we can go and get carriage deals and get our content on platforms all over the world, but working with the Canadian cable companies is the worst experience that we have. Generally speaking, not all of them.
I do feel that OUTtv provides that voice, has a TV channel, linear TV channel, and now an app. And just even though it is a business, the reality is you are, having an impact on social change. No matter how difficult that might be in certain circumstances, I applaud the work that you guys are doing. And I say kudos to surviving all this time and actually even expanding the business. But really, when I say surviving, I'm talking about the 2006 period when you were sent to Toronto and asked to evaluate this business that was in decline, and you've turned it around, and you've even made it Vancouver's only private television channel, at least in terms of headquarters. I know you still have a big office in Toronto, but is it safe to say, can we say that you're the only Vancouver private TV channel?
We're the only national television channel that broadcasts, has head office in Vancouver. Yes. Our office, we don't really have an office anymore in Toronto. We kept one there for a while, but we only have one employee now in Ontario. And then we have our ad sales team that's separate. But we really have moved everything to Vancouver. So yes, and by the way, we were told we could never do it.
Yes.
One of the things we constantly got is that you can't do it. You have to move everything to Toronto because that's just the way you have to do it. And I think I do say that at times we did work harder to prove that they were wrong. I never understood why. The advertising side I get, but everything else I don't get. And we've been able to do it. I do think, to be honest with you, there's a bit of a drawback in Toronto, Montreal a bit, but Toronto, in that the community tends to live amongst itself, and there become a lot of truisms, the way people think and the way they approach the business. And I think that's a problem in Canada right now because I don't see enough innovation, particularly from the larger media companies. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that have to do with the fact they spend too much time talking to each other and too much time talking to Bay Street analysts and too much time trying to keep their quarterlies up and not enough time innovating and trying to create sustainable businesses.
Yeah. I think that's potentially a topic for a whole other podcast to talk about the divide between Western Canada and what we produce here and what gets produced in Toronto. But I do want to also quickly wrap up this conversation by highlighting what you just previously said about that was quite motivating to me, which is you were told that you could not create a company that was headquartered in Vancouver. And those are the very similar words that you shared with me when I wanted to move to Vancouver. And everybody told me you will not be able to find a job in Vancouver for distribution.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I figured it out. So there's always a way. We just have to find the solutions. And it may not look exactly the way you would have imagined in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Brad. It was a real good pleasure to have you on the show and to talk about OUTtv's story and how you are taking these great stories, these great LGBTQ plus stories to global audiences. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure, Eric.
All right, take care. And that was episode number 6 of Global Vid. Thanks for listening, and thanks to OUTtv and Brad Danks for today's interview, as well as Amber Goodwin and Aaron Ross for our theme song. Until next time, stay safe out there, everyone.